Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the second consultation webinar session of the expansion of the nationwide house energy rating scheme to existing homes, which of course we all fondly refer to as NatHERS. Today's focus will be Assessor services. My name is Joanne Reedy, and I will be your chair today and for the next consultation session scheduled for the 15th of August. My role in NatHERS is Director of the Program Delivery Team, and this means that I focus right now on the day-to-day delivery of NatHERS for new homes, and that I will be responsible for delivering existing home scheme from launch. So I am very interested in making sure that these consultations yield excellent information that optimises the design of our future scheme. If anyone is having technical issues accessing, hearing or seeing the presentation today at any stage, please email admin@nathers.gov.au and someone will get back to you. That email address is on your screen right now. Please note that today's webinar is being recorded and that it will be published on our website in coming weeks. I'd like to start this session by acknowledging the First Nations people throughout Australia and recognise their continuing connection to country and culture. I'm joining you all today from Canberra on the lands of the Ngunnawal people, and I'd like to pay my respects to their elders past and present. I'd also like to extend that acknowledgement and respect to any First Nations people who are joining us today. The structure of today's webinar is shown on the screen now, so please note that we have pre-recorded the presentation. Before I hand over to the team for presentations, just want to provide those of you who are new to the Nationwide House Energy Rating Scheme, NatHERS, some background information. If you were in the first session last week, this will be a little bit repetitive. For over 30 years now, NatHERS has been providing an evidence-based and data-driven way to assess the energy performance of new homes. It is the preferred energy rating method for demonstrating compliance with energy efficiency requirements under the National Construction Code in Australia. With regards to existing homes, there is a significant opportunity to help drive improvement in Australia's existing housing stock, with most homes built before the introduction of minimum energy performance requirements, which we are happy to see in new homes designs today. We also know most home buyers need better information to make informed decisions when buying, selling, or renovating their existing homes. So, just like new homeowners, those in established homes should have access to reliable information on energy performance and advice on upgrades that can be made to reduce home running costs and improve comfort. And so that's what the Australian Government has committed to achieving through the expansion of NatHERS into existing homes. So we are really pleased that you could join us today and be part of this consultation process on the proposed approach to delivering the expansion of NatHERS to existing homes. And while we know there is a lot of work to do to ensure NatHERS for existing homes is fully functional and fit for purpose, it is worth reflecting that the scheme already has established national governance arrangements that are administered by the Commonwealth on behalf of all states and territories. It already has legitimacy and credibility as supported by the best available science from CSIRO. It has nationally established third-party delivery partners, some of whom are with us today, and over 800 assessors accredited for new build ratings. And it is accepted by international investors as a trusted and verifiable source to support green investment. The development pathway for the expanded scheme was agreed by Energy and Climate Change Ministers in late 2023, with this consultation a key part of the expansion pathway. With all that in mind, the key purpose of this series of webinars is to provide you with information on what's proposed for the expansion of NatHERS to existing homes and to provide you an opportunity to ask questions and seek clarification about the information covered today. Today we'll have pre-recordings from Jo Brennan, who's leading the NatHERS program design team, and she will briefly outline the structure of the consultation and will give us an overview of NatHERS. We also have Toby Lawrenson, who is leading the training and trials work for NatHERS for existing homes, and we'll have Isaac Gravelin, who is leading the strategy, assurance and governance of NatHERS for new and existing homes. After the presentations, I'll be opening a session for questions using a tool called Slido. We're going to show you the Slido QR code soon and a link that you can see on the screen right now. Once again, after the presentations, you can see it now. To access Slido, simply scan the QR code with your phone or device, or enter the URL into your browser and use the code NatHERS. We welcome you to submit questions throughout the presentation, but please note that questions will be moderated and a preference will be given to questions that are most relevant to this session and that have been asked by an individual or an organisation as opposed to those asked anonymously. This will be done so that we can manage the high volume that we are anticipating. And moderators will also be attempting to reduce duplication, so please bear with them while they sort through the questions. Okay, I'm going to now hand over the team to begin the presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Jo. I'll provide an overview of the consultation process and take you through a general overview of NatHERS for existing homes. I'll then hand over to my colleagues who'll take you through the rest of the presentation. On Monday, the 29th of July, we released the NatHERS for Existing Homes consultation paper. It was published on the department's Consultation Hub and also on the NatHERS website. We welcome your feedback in any form on the proposals outlined in that paper. It could be a comprehensive submission from your organisation that responds to all of the questions outlined there, or it could be a short letter with your organisation's general view. We're also running these webinars to provide an opportunity to ask questions or seek clarification on the proposed approach to expanding NatHERS. Starting with this session today, we're focusing on the Assessor services, including training, accreditation and auditing. But if you're interested in finding out more about energy rating tools and accreditation, come along to session 3. That'll be held on Thursday, the 15th of August. We'll also be publishing the webinar from session 1 shortly, and that one focused on the consumer experience. I'll start with an overview of NatHERS for existing homes. So let's do a quick refresh on the nationwide house energy rating scheme. NatHERS provides robust, reliable and credible assessments and ratings for homes. It's administered by the Department of Climate Change, Energy, the Environment and Water in the Commonwealth on behalf of all states and territories. So the purpose of NatHERS is to help improve the design, construction and energy performance of Australian homes to reduce energy waste and demand. The scheme does this by giving people information and modelling tools that can assess different options. For example, at the design stage of a new building, NatHERS can provide information about how the design or window layouts can be changed to reduce the need for heating and cooling. At that stage, different options can be tested and the house can be optimised at its design stage. At the existing building stage, NatHERS can provide information about what upgrades could be made, such as adding window shading or installing an efficient heating or cooling device, and again, different options can be tested. The final output from NatHERS is a star rating out of 10 for the thermal performance and an overall energy rating score for the whole home. So the higher the rating, the more comfortable the home will be to live in and the less energy the home will use, making it cheaper to run. There's a significant opportunity to upgrade the energy performance of Australia's housing stock. Most Australian homes were built without consideration of Australian climates, and most were built before the introduction of minimum energy performance requirements. Improving the energy performance of Australian homes will help us meet net zero emissions by 2050. Residential buildings still account for more than 10% of emissions and around a quarter of electricity use. I'd say many of you here could probably relate personally to a story about living in an uncomfortable home, and that's because the average existing home in Australia has an estimated rating of less than 3 out of 10 stars. New homes are required to meet a minimum of 7 stars under increased requirements for energy efficiency in the National Construction Code 2022. So improving a home from 3 to 5 stars could reduce the amount of heating and cooling needed by around 40%. Recent research by Climate Works demonstrated that full electrification of appliances and solar PV, plus thermal upgrades, could save households thousands each year. NatHERS for Existing Homes aims to provide consistent and comparable ratings to support improved energy performance of homes and supports a range of broader objectives. Thermal performance improvements can help increase the comfort of homes, while installing energy-efficient appliances can help reduce energy costs. NatHERS also provides information on the greenhouse gas emissions associated with the operational energy use of the home, with upgrade advice aiming to help reduce emissions. NatHERS also values energy at the time it's used or produced in the system, helping to reduce energy demand on the grid. The development of NatHERS for existing homes will be delivered through 3 stages. So in late 2023, Energy and Climate Change Ministers agreed the development stages with a focus on design, build, trial, operate and scale up. We're currently consulting on stage 1 for launch in mid-2025, with a proposal on the delivery model for NatHERS for existing homes and trials underway. There are also ongoing opportunities for consultation on guidelines, rules and strategies that will underpin NatHERS, and that consultation will run out to 2025, although much of the detail will be run through NatHERS advisory groups. Ministers will be presented with a final design of the existing home scheme for consideration in 2025 to allow for launch mid-2025. Post-launch of stage 1, there'll be further work to enhance and scale up NatHERS in readiness for disclosure and other demand drivers. There are a broad range of drivers for the availability of ratings for existing homes, as it's a key enabling mechanism for a range of targeted building policies. The drivers range from overcoming information barriers for households, supporting the disclosure of energy efficiency at the point of sale or lease, or enabling grant programs or financial products to accelerate investments in upgrades.
Following on from what Joe has said, I'll now provide information on a proposed approach to assessor training. To apply for accreditation as a NatHERS assessor for new homes, applicants must have completed CPP 41119, the Certificate 4 in Home Energy Efficiency and Sustainability Thermal Performance Assessment, or CPP 4119, the Certificate 4 in Home Energy Efficiency and Sustainability Home Sustainability Assessment and Thermal Performance Assessment. This is the current Certificate 4 course required to apply for accreditation. If you have a prior qualification that was superseded, such as these 2 Certificate 4s, they also meet minimum training requirements. In 2022, all Australian governments agreed to minimum training requirements for NatHERS assessors for existing homes. They are 7 units from the Certificate 4 in Home Energy Efficiency and Sustainability and a NatHERS for Existing Homes specific training module, which we're calling the 8th unit. That unit's currently being developed and focuses on what is needed for existing home assessments. It draws from a needs analysis conducted with stakeholders in late 2021 and early 2022, and experience of existing home assessments already being conducted, such as through the Residential Efficiency Scorecard. And these are the 8 units for NatHERS assessors for existing homes. I won't read these out as they're all included in the consultation paper as well. DQ is in the process of developing training content and resources for all 8 units with an external training provider. We will run a training delivery pilot of that content and include pilot participants from a range of backgrounds. They will go on to be trial assessors for a subsequent field trial. As the time commitment for those trial assessors is significant, they will be funded to participate in the training delivery pilot and perform trial assessments in homes. Additionally, The field trial will inform the development of the skills and training strategy, which will be consulted on later. There are similar schemes with an established workforce of energy assessors delivering home energy ratings for Australian households. These include the Residential Efficiency Scorecard and the ACT EER Disclosure Scheme, which has been in operation since 1997. A streamlined transition pathway is proposed for Scorecard, ACT EER and NatHERS Assessors for new homes, recognising the training and accreditation processes and demonstrated experience of these groups of assessors. This ensures industry stability and a suitably qualified workforce for home energy ratings at launch. It is proposed that Scorecard, ACT EER or NatHERS assessors can apply for accreditation as a NatHERS assessor for existing homes once they successfully complete the following bridging training. This is the NatHERS Existing Homes specific training module, energy rating tool training, and additional work health and safety training that may also be required depending on the specific unit previously completed. It is essential that when NatHERS for Existing Homes is launched, qualified assessors are ready to assess and rate homes. Specific grandfathering provisions will be developed for NatHERS assessors for existing homes. These arrangements may include a defined period during which Scorecard, ACT EER and NatHERS assessors can transfer to be NatHERS assessors for existing homes. In addition to the workforce transition approach for those current energy assessors, for the first 7 units required to apply for accreditation, existing recognition of prior learning processes are expected to be utilised by registered training organisations. Training for prospective NatHERS assessors for existing homes would initially be provided by specific training providers under direct contract with the NatHERS administrator. With the current arrangement for new homes, the NatHERS administrator has no formal relationship with the RTOs who deliver the certificate for. The preferred approach to training shown here could provide the NatHERS administrator an improved ability to manage emerging training issues and update required training where necessary. This approach would also ensure that training delivery and an initial pool of assessors will be available at launch in mid-2025. Close oversight of training initially aims to verify that the foundational assessors are well positioned to support new assessors as they join the industry, either through informal arrangements or by taking more formal roles as trainers or in assessor accreditation. Once the industry is established, the plan is to assess transitioning training to the vet sector. The training covered by this approach focuses on the 8 units we have discussed and not training in specific NatHERS energy rating tools. Tool-specific training will initially be developed by CSIRO for the field trial and then further be considered when other tools are available or close to available, including identifying which parties are best placed to deliver the tool training.
Thanks, Toby. Next up, I want to talk to you a little bit about the proposed approach to assessor accreditation for NatHERS for existing homes. My name's Isaac Gravelin, and I'm the Director of the NatHERS Strategy, Assurance and Governance. So there'll be more information about what we're proposing for the accreditation process and requirements available online on our website, and there will be detailed sessions very soon going through those detailed processes and requirements, also including our proposed assurance strategy for existing homes and complaints processes, as well as the code of practice. But we want to give a brief overview of what we're looking at for accreditation here to give some context about the general decisions that are being made. So we know that it's critical that households can be confident that their assessor is trustworthy and has the right skills and knowledge to conduct an assessment. And this is why all NatHERS for existing homes assessors must be accredited. So at launch, we're proposing a 3-step accreditation process with annual requirements to maintain accreditation. So this process learns from and draws on the approach currently applied for NatHERS for new homes, as well as the approaches that have been successfully trialled by the Residential Efficiency Scorecard. So the first step in this accreditation process is submitting your application. And that involves completing an application form, providing evidence of your achievement of the required units of competency under the training. It'll require evidence of your completion of the NatHERS for Existing Homes specific training, as well as training in your software tool of choice. It'll also involve submitting a National Police Records check, as well as privacy incident management protocols. Once the application has been submitted and it's been determined that all of these initial requirements have been met, the applicant will pass on to the examination phase. At this point, they'll have to successfully complete an online accreditation exam. This will test the ability of the assessor to complete a NatHERS assessment for an existing home, including how technical requirements should be applied to the home. Once that exam is completed and has been passed, the applicant will have to submit documentation. So this will include insurance certificates, declaring any material personal interests they may have, such as if they have a relationship with, let's say, a heat pump supplier. They will have to sign the Assessor Code of Practice, and they'll also have to upload a digital passport-style photograph to be used in their ID when they visit homes. Once they are accredited and they've gone through that process, they will still need to demonstrate that they are meeting certain requirements every year to maintain their accreditation. And so this means demonstrating that they've still got the required insurances, making sure that their declaration of personal interest is up to date, making sure they've met their CPD requirements, and making sure that they've complied with any required performance improvement actions, or shown that they have completed the parts of those actions that were required within the year, and also demonstrated that they can be compliant with the Code of Practice and they don't have an unacceptable history of complaints or underperformance. And then beyond that annual process of making sure that they are still fit to hold accreditation, there will be a process every third year, which will also require the assessor to complete a short online knowledge and skill assessment to make sure that they've still got current skills and training to be able to deliver accurate assessments. And they will also have to submit updated privacy incident management protocols to make sure that they can handle people's data and information in a safe way. So that was the accreditation process and model that we're proposing for the launch of NatHERS for Existing Homes in mid-2025. At launch, we want to have a single standard process for all assessors that would be suitable for someone who has walked in off the street, gotten the required training, just so we know that anybody who gets an assessment from anyone who is accredited can be confident that their assessment and rating is going to be correct and accurate. And so this standard accreditation process for launch will accredit somebody for all aspects of a NatHERS assessment for an existing home. And that includes going to the house to collect the assessment data, as well as generating the actual certificate using NatHERS software. But we know that this single approach may not consider all business models or use cases that the market may want to apply. So we're going to take the results from the trial, we're going to take the feedback that we receive from you and from other stakeholders and industry participants to assess whether other accreditation models are required for after the launch of NatHERS for Existing Homes in mid-2025. So these additional processes could involve recognising existing processes in the market that have significant overlap with our accreditation processes, or potentially allowing accreditation for specific parts of the assessment process. So you could potentially be accredited just for going into a house and collecting the data, but not for actually generating the certificate in the NatHERS accredited software. So what we want to hear from you through our consultation platform is whether there's any considerations for assessor accreditation that are not reflected in the approach that we've put forward. So the next thing that we've laid out in our consultation paper is our proposed approach for how accreditation will be delivered. So we're proposing that assessor accreditation would be delivered by third-party providers that are separate to the NatHERS administrator, and then those third-party providers would be provided at launch through procurement. And so this approach builds off the successful approach that we've used for NatHERS for new homes, in which accreditation service providers are separate from the NatHERS administrator. And this approach would leverage the expertise and systems that already exist in the market, much like under the current arrangements for NatHERS for new homes. The approach would also provide funding to overcome startup costs and incentivize providers to enter the market and deliver a quality service. So we know that until mandatory disclosure of energy ratings or other programs using energy ratings commence, there may not be strong demand for assessments. And so taking a procurement approach through which the NatHERS administrator would provide funding to the assessor accreditation service provider, we can have confidence that there would be reliable services available in the market and that there would be providers willing to deliver those services. This approach will also provide strong arrangements to oversee the performance of providers and to allow us to take action if necessary to ensure they're meeting their obligations. A procurement approach, while ratings for existing homes are stood up, really allows us to work closely with the providers to ensure that assessors, consumers, and households all have confidence in the program in its critical early stages when these new ratings are rolled out. We would review this approach over time, particularly as demand increases and the number of assessments and assessors increase. And then at that point, we'd consider whether it's still the appropriate option. For example, we would look at whether this proposed procurement model in which we would be paying the assessor accreditation service provider for some or all of the services they're delivering, whether that should transition to being a self-funded model, such as the currently in place for accreditation for assessments of new homes under NatHERS. So the exact proposed scope of the procured assessor accreditation service providers' responsibilities will be subject to further consultation and will ultimately depend on what the market can deliver. However, at this point, it's proposed that the assessor accreditation service provider would be responsible for accrediting assessors, managing assessors' compliance with their ongoing accreditation requirements. For example, have they met their yearly CPD needs? Have they maintained their insurances? They'd also be responsible for managing issues of non-compliance in accordance with the requirements set by the NatHERS administrator. So, for example, that could include making sure that assessors have completed their audit-identified performance improvement actions. They would also provide the first contact point for managing and resolving complaints about assessors, with the NatHERS administrator there for external or third-party review of any complaints. The service provider would also provide assessor help desk services and support resources to help assessors deliver accurate assessments when they need advice. They would also be responsible for delivering post-assessment householder experience surveys and also offering CPD activities to make sure that the assessors have all of the training they need to deliver accurate assessments. So what we really want to know from you in this consultation is whether you have any concerns with delivering assessor accreditation services via procuring third-party providers. So the next thing I want to talk to you about is the proposed approach to auditing and evidence for NatHERS for existing homes. As with the accreditation requirements, this will be subject to further consultation, and you'll have your opportunity to talk and to tell us about what you think about the specific requirements, but right now we want to give you a general overview of the broad approach that we're proposing for NatHERS for existing homes. So a fundamental principle of our expansion of NatHERS to rate existing homes is that we need to make sure people are confident in their assessments and confident in their ratings. So to give this confidence to consumers receiving assessments, to give this confidence to states and territories, to facilitate mandatory disclosure of energy ratings, and to give this confidence to banks to underpin green loans, there needs to be a process in which assessments are checked. We're proposing for this process to be conducted by independent auditors who would be procured by the NatHERS administrator. So this approach with a direct contract between the NatHERS administrator and the auditors would ensure we have strong control and oversight over the volume and method of audits. Separating the auditors from other service providers would also ensure confidence in the independence of the audit process. So these independent auditors would be responsible for reviewing assessments against standard procedures to determine whether they've been completed correctly based on the available evidence. They'd provide an audit report and recommended performance improvement actions to the assessor and to the assessor accreditation service provider so that the assessor knows where they can improve, and to also identify any additional requirements for the assessor that might be needed, such as training or mentoring. They'd also be responsible for providing information to assessor accreditation service providers, software tool providers, and the NatHERS administrator to help us understand any trends in assessments and take action where required. So what we want to know from you is whether you support the separation of audit responsibilities from the assessor accreditation service provider. So to enable audits, we're proposing that assessors will need to collect evidence to demonstrate the key assessment inputs, much as is required for the residential efficiency scorecard. This evidence would most likely be photos, such as a photo of a heating or cooling appliance that's been entered, but it could also be documents where they exist. For example, a floor plan, an invoice demonstrating installation of insulation, or a past NatHERS assessment with detailed design specifications. And to protect households from privacy risks, assessors would be trained and instructed to avoid the capture of unintended personal information. So for example, one of the requirements would be no people or other personal information in the background of photos. The assessors would be required to comply with stringent requirements when collecting and sharing evidence, which includes collecting consent from households for every assessment, and this would be a requirement to have your assessment completed. And the assessors would also provide the householder with the opportunity to review the photos that have been taken and to delete any photos that they're not comfortable with prior to the assessment ending. So the assessor could then go back and capture a different photo that the household would be comfortable with. So what we really want to know from you here is whether you support this requirement for evidence to be collected so that we can verify the accuracy of assessments. Once evidence is collected, there needs to be a way of storing the evidence and providing it for quality assurance or audit purposes if needed. To ensure the evidence that is collected is safe and can be made available for the required purposes, we're investigating whether all evidence should be uploaded as part of the assessment using the NatHERS software tool. This would then be stored in a secure central database with strict cybersecurity protections. The evidence could then be deleted from the assessor's device, so they don't need to find a way to safely store and manage multiple years' worth of evidence, and they don't need to dig out that evidence if they are selected for audit, because it would all be in that central database. So this approach has been successfully used by the Residential Efficiency Scorecard, which requires evidence to be uploaded through its tool. This evidence database is unlikely to be available for launch in mid-2025. So we would have interim evidence storage and collection arrangements in the meantime until the central evidence database and tool upload functionality is ready. So we want to know whether you support this requirement for evidence to be uploaded as part of an assessment and stored in a central database.
Okay, well, that was a lot of information, and I thank Joe, Toby, and Isaac for that. I'm sure that you have some questions. You may have come with some pre-prepared questions, and you may have more now, and that's really great for us. So just to give you an idea about how this process will work, we've given you some information. We'd like for you to ask us as many questions as we can fit into the remaining time today so that we can answer those. And then on our Have Your Say website, you'll find that there are consultation papers and an avenue for you to make submissions to feed to us so that we can make sure that we design a process that is going to work for NatHERS for Existing Homes. All right, so now, can you get ready, please, to ask your questions via Slido? Before we get there, I'm going to introduce you to our panel members, and I'll invite those panel members right now to turn on their camera and audio. So we've got Isaac, who featured just a minute ago, and who's leading our strategy, assurance and governance of NatHERS for new and existing homes. We have Toby Lawrenson, who was on just a little bit beforehand, who's leading our trials work. Welcome, Toby. And our final panel member, who I'm sure many of you are familiar with, is Jo Brennan, and she's leading the expansion of NatHERS to existing homes. So welcome to you guys, and welcome to everybody online. I'll note again that our moderators have held over, just to update you, we've got almost 200 people online now. So our moderators are busy at work right now. I've seen their activity on my right, and they're very quickly going through all of your questions. They've also got questions that were held over from the previous consultation session. So we're expecting a busy session now. That shouldn't hold you back from asking your questions. We really invite you to do so, but please understand that we'll be getting back to you in a variety of other ways if we don't answer your questions today. The questions that were held over from last session are going to come on at the end if there aren't enough questions to fill up our time. So we will be here for the full time today. We're also going to review all of the questions from all of the sessions from our consultation process, and we'll be using those to inform updates to our facts and information that's available on our NatHERS website. All right, let's switch over to the Q&A part of the webinar. So as you can see on the screen, there are two ways that you can access Slido to ask your questions. The first option is to scan the QR code that you can see right now on the slide deck. The second option is for you to visit www.slido.com and enter the code NatHERS, NATHERS, in the Join as Participant box. And remember, if you are having any issues and you want to submit a question, please email that question to admin@nathers.gov.au. We have people manning that email account now, and we're going to aim to either transfer your questions across to this Slido or ensure that we get back to you personally with a response. Right, so you'll be able to see from the Slido slide that comes up right now that there are a number of questions there already. So I'm going to ask those questions and throw to some people to provide you with an answer. So from Dave Pemberton, thank you, Dave. Currently, energy assessments do not need to be undertaken by accredited assessors in some states. Will that be the same for existing homes? And I think as the accreditation expert, Isaac, I'm going to throw that question over to you.
Thanks, Joe. This one is reasonably straightforward to answer, I hope. So our proposal is that to use NatHERS for Existing Homes software to generate a certificate, you will need to be accredited.
That's good. Thank you, Isaac. That was reasonably quick. Okay. Next question from Anonymous. Who can apply for the trial for the workforce transition? I'm an accredited assessor, not me, the person who's asking, an accredited scorecard assessor, so I understand the need to do the bridging course. And I think as the training expert, Toby, can you pick that one up?
Thanks, Joe. So We will shortly open up an expression of interest process for the field trial. In the meantime, there will soon, before that starts, there will be more information on the NatHERS website soon, and you can, of course, sign up for the NatHERS newsletter or send an email through to the NatHERS inbox, admin@nathers.gov.au, if you're interested in participating in the trial, and then that makes sure that we keep you advised as that process progresses.
Thanks, Toby. And that is a process that works. We had some interest after the first session, the first consultation session, and we're following those through. So please, if you're interested in participating in the trial, step forward. Namasha, what specific information do assessors need to collect during house visits for energy efficiency assessments? Isaac?
Thanks, Joe. This one is a more complex question than the last one, and I won't be able to answer it in 100% of detail right now because there is a lot that goes into an assessment, as I'm sure many people already know, and the exact requirements or the exact proposed requirements for that will become available over the course of time leading up to launch of NatHERS for Existing Homes in mid-2025, including through the software and through the technical and guidance note. But in general, they will need to go in and collect information about the design and construction of the home. So windows, walls, those sorts of things, insulation, where that information is available and safe to collect. And they'll also need to collect information about the appliances that are in the house. So fixed appliances such as heating and cooling, so air conditioning for spaces as well as water heating, if there's solar panels, all of those sorts of things. But I would encourage all of you to sit tight and see the exact detailed information that will come out subsequently on those things.
Thank you, Isaac. And Namasha,
Joe, I might
thank you.
just, jump in on that as well and just add a little bit about we're trialing some different approaches to collecting information as well on site. And if you're interested in seeing a demonstration of those different approaches that are being trialed, encourage you, Namasha, to come along to the energy rating tools and tool accreditation session on Thursday, where we'll have our partners from the CSIRO providing a demonstration of some of those different ways of collecting on-site data.
Nice. Thank you, Joe. Isaac, I'm going to draw from you again for our next question from Paul Kearney. Will a customer have to sign any form of privacy doc for the storage of the assessment?
Thanks, Joe. Yes, we're proposing that the client or customer, being the household, will have to sign a consent form at the commencement of the assessment. That would include consent to the collection of photos and other evidence, and that would cover off on their privacy requirements and things like that.
Got to unmute myself. Please keep your questions coming. I think I'll ask a question for Isaac. Sorry, Isaac, I do feel like I'm picking on you a bit, but there seems to be a lot of questions in our Slido with regard to accreditation and QA. So this one's about QAs. Will the audit process be managed by current AAOs or NatHERS introducing a new process? That's from Daryl.
So that's a good question. So what we're proposing is that the audit process for assessments would be handled by an independent third-party auditor. As was outlined earlier, and you will be able to see in our consultation paper, there are a number of reasons for this. One of those is to give, at least for the launch of NatHERS for Existing Homes, the NatHERS administrator direct visibility and engagement with that to stay across any emerging trends are things that arise as the scheme is launched, but we are proposing for it to be managed by independent auditors separate from the assessor accrediting service provider.
Thanks, Isaac. Joe, I'm going to pop this question up here just as an example of what might be able to be answered at our next consultation session. So this one is about the software. When will we be given access to learn the assessing software?
Thanks for the question there. So at the moment, we're in the process of developing the training around software as per Toby's presentation, and we're working with the CSIRO around that in terms of the trial, particularly for the trial process, to ensure that anyone entering the field during the trial has had the relevant training in that trial software. In terms of broader access to the software, that option will be available, and there'll be more information about that in our next session. But again, probably just encourage you to keep up to date via the NatHERS newsletter, because when those things become available, when there's more resources being, for example, added to the website, as we mentioned, the consultation is ongoing, especially around the underpinning detail around the scheme. There's a lot of detail that sort of goes around setting all of the elements of the scheme up, and we'll be looking at continuing to consult on that as it becomes available. So keep up to date, sign up to our newsletter, and we'll look forward to providing you more resources as they become available.
Thanks so much, Joe. Okay, from Jack. If the mandatory disclosure is introduced, there will be a massive spike in demand for assessments. So Jack is wondering, will the existing base of 800 assessors and new assessor training be able to handle it? That's a very good question, and one that's on our mind. And I think I'm going to go over to you, Joby, for that one.
Thanks for the question. That's a really good question. We have been doing a lot of work around, demand profiles and looking at, what impact that would have on the number of assessments needed, and also, what that would mean in terms of workforce and workforce need and transition. So we anticipate that I suppose we've got a good idea about what the voluntary market looks like at the moment through the residential efficiency scorecard. Is doing around over 1,000 assessments at the moment. We know that for NatHERS New Homes, we are doing around 150 to 200,000 assessments per year. We anticipate that under a mandatory disclosure setting, there could be a much bigger need, so 700,000 plus, and there could be other demand drivers as well, such as finance products or other subsidy or grant programs. So, at the moment, we're using all of the data available to us to look at what the different workforce profile might look like, depending on which of those drivers comes into play at particular times. And so, that's got a lot to do with us and the workforce transition proposal that is out for consultation at the moment, which is about those suite, sets of cohorts of assessors who are already working in the field being able to have a sort of bridging approach to applying for accreditation under NatHERS. And we think that with all of those things, we'll be able to deliver what's needed for the market. As well as that, in the trials, we're looking at other professions that have the attributes that make it viable as well. So valuers are a part of that, and we know there are large numbers of different professions such as valuers available and ready to go across most of Australia, if not all, actually.
Thanks, Joe. Got a question from Vicky Marshall. If all evidence is deleted from the assessor device, as we discussed earlier, what happens if there is a question regarding that evidence that arises sometime in the future? How is the assessor going to answer that question? Isaac, is that a good one for you?
Thanks, Joe. It's a very good question. So what we're proposing with this option, and we certainly want to hear from all of you on this about whether you think it's a feasible approach and an effective and efficient approach, is that because all of the evidence would be kept in this secure database, if there was questions regarding that specific evidence, the auditor or whoever was required to go and check that evidence or had to answer that question would be able to go into that database and look at that evidence to verify what had happened. If they had further questions about the evidence that couldn't be answered through the evidence itself, they would still be able to go back to that assessor and ask questions if required. But the evidence itself, such as the photos, for the purpose of avoiding duplication and assessors having to carry around large amounts of photos with them for extended periods of time, could all be stored in one central location that could be accessed by the NatHERS administrator.
Great, thank you, Isaac. Hoping we get some submissions related to that to help us out with our design process. Okay, Michael Tibbs has asked, could you provide more detail on the bridging course requirements for an existing scorecard assessor? Okay, so I think I'll give that one to you, Toby. You haven't spoken in a while.
Thanks, Joe. So the expectations for scorecard assessors, and the same goes for NatHERS assessors for new homes, is, and this is what we're going to be, I guess, testing through the trial, and obviously seeking feedback on that in this consultation. But the intent is that any existing assessors out of those groups would have to do this 8th unit, the NatHERS for Existing Homes specific training module. They'd have to do energy rating tool training, and they may also have to do some work health and safety training, depending on which units they've previously done. But that is it is assumed that that's the extent of the bridging training.
I hope that's good for you, Michael. Thanks for the question, and thank you, Toby, for responding. From Anonymous, will the assessments be limited to homeowners only, or will assessors be able to conduct home assessments requested by tenants renting the property also? Good question. I think I'll give that to you, Isaac.
Thanks, Joe. That is a good question. What we're proposing, and there's more information about this in the proposed assurance strategy that's now available on the NatHERS website. So I encourage you guys to go and have a look at that. There's also a form on our website if you wanted to give any feedback on those specific documents. Also on our website is the proposed accreditation requirements, and that will also include the proposed code of practice. But back to the question, we're proposing that tenants will also be able to have assessments if they request one. We would appreciate the feedback of everybody on the process for that, but I believe what we have proposed is that the tenant would have to provide consent for any assessments that happen in a property when the tenant is in the property, regardless of whether it's requested by the homeowner or the tenant. And if the tenant wants one off their own volition, we're still working through and would really appreciate your feedback on whether that consent should also be provided by the homeowner in that case.
Thanks, Isaac. Okay, next one from Tamar. Will the assessment be based on drawings or just what is visually accessed during the visit? So Isaac, I'm sorry, I know you just finished speaking, but I'm going to give you a go at this one as well.
Thanks, Joe. So the assessment will be based on the evidence that's available to the assessor at the time. So an assessment will be able to be conducted entirely off what is visually available. But if there is additional documentation available, that can be used as well or as a substitute for the visual evidence. For example, if there is evidence of insulation in the walls or the ceiling, documentary evidence of that, but the assessor on site, for whatever reason, couldn't see into that wall, they would be able to use that documentary evidence instead. I hope that answers the question.
Thanks, Isaac. Oh, I was just about to read Adrian, so I'm going to go ahead and read it. As an accredited assessor, and thank you for being one, for new homes and whole of home, is there anything required for me to be able to become accredited for existing homes apart from apply? So, Toby, I reckon. Oh,
Yep.
Toby and Joe, maybe between you can answer that.
Thanks, Joe Reedy. I'm happy to give that a go. So as with scorecard, it will be doing these couple of units. So the NatHERS for existing home specific unit, doing the tool training and potentially a work health and safety unit, and then and then obviously meeting the other requirements to be eligible to apply for accreditation. But that's sort of they're the training requirements that we're proposing for existing accredited assessors.
And I might just add to that one as well. Existing accredited assessors would need to go through, or is proposed they would go through the rest of the accreditation process, which I will flag. Once again, more details on that are available on our website.
Thank you, Isaac, and thank you, Toby. All right, back to the green one at the very top of the screen. Will there be an option to complete an assessment without attending a site if plans and specs are supplied? All right, so I think, Joe, would you like to handle that question?
That's a really good question. Thanks for your question. Look, I think in terms of the evidence required to complete an assessment, it's really about being able to sort of demonstrate that the appropriate approach has been taken. So, I think if in the case of, say, for example, a new home rating and, there had recently been a full assessment undertaken for that home, then we would be able to look at, what additional information might be needed. If there is anything missing, there might be a need to go to the home. But yeah, I think it's a good question, and we'll probably need to think about being a bit more specific around that area. But yeah, it really comes down to, is there enough information to base a valid assessment on?
Joe, can I get you to continue the flow with that question, because the one underneath DIES from Roger Burrell is relevant to this as well. What about assessment for apartments and units in large blocks? Could an assessor utilise previous data from previous assessments on another like apartment?
I would say as long as the assessor was able to demonstrate that it was a valid assessment that was undertaken. For example, if there were, identical apartments within a large block as per the plan, then, there wouldn't be any reason why you wouldn't be able to transfer the data across, because it would be, reasonable to demonstrate that was valid. That was, a valid approach to undertaking the assessment.
Thanks, Joe. Okay, now to DIES. The scale stream that was discussed in our previous session proposes that valuers may undertake inspections in trial. Will there be a training requirement that will there be training requirements that differ from those discussed today for that stream? Toby, would you like to handle that one?
Yep, I can. So the scale stream is part of the phase 2 field trial, and yes, that is correct, that we're proposing to use valuers as data collectors. So what's happening in the scale stream essentially sits outside of what will be, it won't be available for launch. This is testing an additional way and a way to achieve assessments at scale. That's why it's called the scale stream. So the valuers, it's proposed that they would receive training on the data collection tool that's being used in the trial, but they wouldn't receive the other training because it will be a NatHERS assessor that is doing the assessment and rating offsite using that data collected by the valuers in-home.
Thanks, Toby. The next question is going to be for you too, but just before I ask it, we've got half an hour left of our consultation session today, so you can see we've provided a lot of time to answer your questions. Please, if you have some, put them into our Slido. But Toby, back to the question. Do scorecard assessors and NatHERS assessors have to undertake the exam?
Yeah, so the proposal is that you would have to meet all of the minimum training requirements, and we've talked about how that's a reduced set of minimum training requirements for those existing assessor groups if you're an accredited assessor. But then you would still have to meet whatever other accreditation processes were required. So as Isaac talked to earlier, there's an accreditation exam.
Okay, the next question is also about training, but I'll give you a breather and I'll go to Isaac for the question from Malcolm Eady. A national assessor capacity is a necessary precursor for rapid and scaled rollout of mandatory disclosures. Sorry, it just moved around on my screen, then got a bit confusing. How does the proposed procurement model for assessor training and accreditation achieve this if market demand driven?
Thanks, Jay. That's a good question. So the proposed procurement model, particularly for assessor accreditation, but also for assessor training, is really designed to make sure these services are available at launch at the high level of quality before mandatory disclosure would come into play. We've noted that as mandatory disclosure or other potential demand driving programs that could use NatHERS assessments for existing homes, such as grant schemes, if they were to exist, as those would come into existence, we would continue to review the model that we're using and assess whether it should transition to a market-driven self-funded model in the case of accreditation or delivery. Well, I'm speaking for Toby slightly on this, but delivery through the usual training sector models for training.
Thanks, Isaac. Okay, Danny, I've seen your question pop up and down. Is there a strategy for promoting workforce transition for potential assessors in rural, regional and remote areas of Australia? And isn't that a question that could apply to almost any industry these days? I'll give that one to you, Joby.
Thanks. That's a great question and really important for us to be able to, provide equitable, accessible services under the scheme. It's really important to be able to provide that rural, regional and remote option as well as for diverse communities. And it is definitely a big part of what we're looking at the moment. So Danny, I'd encourage you to sign up to the NatHERS news because we will be consulting later either late this year or early next year on the workforce strategy. And that is really going to cover a lot of these different issues in more detail. So we'd welcome your input on that. One of the things we're doing in the trials at the moment is trying to ensure that we can offer those equitable and accessible services to everybody across Australia, and that's a big part of the scale stream. So we do know that the attributes that come with the valuer industry is that there is pretty much 98 or 99% coverage of postcodes, and that is a big part of what the valuer industry needs to be able to deliver. And so that attribute is quite, quite an appealing professional coverage. So that's hence why we're looking at all different property and construction industries, sub-industries, and really trying to identify how we can overcome some of those challenges that we have seen in previous programs and other areas around regional and remote delivery. So yeah, thanks for the question.
Thanks, Jo. Okay, from Roger Burrell. Do you anticipate the market of assessors breaking into two distinct streams, that is, one specialising in new homes and one only specialising in existing homes? Toby, would you like to handle that question for us?
Yeah, sure. Look, our thinking is that probably it'll be a mix. It won't. There will be some new homes assessors who just want to continue doing new homes. There'll be some that want to do both, and there'll some that might go, I just want to do existing homes. So that and that's obviously for NatHERS accredited assessors we're talking about. But yeah, I don't think it'll be a black and white. I think there'll be a mix because it will probably suit some assessors to continue doing what they do with new homes, and others would like to mix up what they do, and maybe others would like to change entirely to doing existing homes assessments.
Thank you, Toby. Jo B, can you answer this question from Anonymous for us? What kind of connection will there be with the whole of home certificate, both overview and technical?
Thanks for the question. It's a great question. So we did, if you're interested in more detail around the certificate, we'll be publishing the webinar one shortly, and that did go into a bit of a deep dive around the certificate. And there will be some further detail on Thursday, this Thursday, the 15th, about the technical settings. So I encourage you to also attend that if you've got the capacity. In terms of the connection, it is actually a really important part of the providing comparable and consistent information for consumers, that we have leveraged most of everything we can that's relevant in an existing home setting from the new homes process, and that includes, the approach to different metrics and ratings and calculation methods and other things, and that's also some of the visual elements as well, and that's to try and help consumers understand the information they're being presented, because it looks very similar and it's the same sort of underpinning process. So yes, there will be quite a strong connection between what's currently in the new home certificate that's supporting the increased requirements for the National Construction Code at the moment, that's operating in the marketplace, and that is proposed for existing homes as well.
Jo, I think you might be best at answering the next one from Brad too, who's asked his from the perspective of being an assessor. So he's saying, based on his experience, he can't see that an assessment on a home will take anything less than, some homes, anything less than a full day. So what is the cost expectation that's being set for the public for these assessments?
No, it's a really great question. Look, in terms of the cost, it's an important point. Obviously, you'll see in the consultation paper we've outlined design principles for the design of existing homes, and one of those, it goes to this point about keeping the data inputs as low as possible in terms of the tool inputs, and trying to keep the costs of assessments low. We know that's really important for government decision makers who are looking at disclosure settings and thinking about their approach in the states and territories to any potential disclosure initiatives, that making sure that that assessments are accessible and that they're cost effective is really important. what we are seeing, and you can see more about this in Thursday's session, but we are, as much as possible looking to streamline the data collection on site. We have conducted a first phase of field trials that's demonstrating that with some assistance from streamlined data collection tools, you can get some of that data collection down a much quicker time than having to sort of measure or document on site. So we'd be really interested in your views, Brad, on the proposed approaches to some of those settings and trying to keep things to a minimum. That's not to say that there are going to be consumers who really want, a tailored assessment that's suitable for whatever their purpose might be. So in terms of those additional really important services that assessors offer, which might be, tailoring an upgrade plan to the needs of that client or taking into account those personal preferences from that homeowner, that would, we expect, take a longer period of time to provide those services, but that would be, I suppose, outside of the scheme and would be up to individual assessor service businesses. So that's probably, probably enough for me on that one.
Thank you, Jo. Question from Janet about CPD activities, which I'll give to you, Isaac. So Janet is wondering how they'll be offered. Will they be offered through an AAO, as happens with NatHERS for new homes, and will there be an added cost? And she's noted that it's not inconsequential right now, that cost.
Thanks, Jay. That's a good question. And what we've proposed is that the Assessor Accreditation Service Provider would be offering CPT activities. That wouldn't limit assessors to only doing CPD through the provider. For example, there may be external courses or events that could qualify for CPD. In terms of the cost, there'll be more details about the specific costs of different elements of this as we get closer to launch. But what I will say is that the intent of taking a procurement approach, so paying the Assessor Accreditation Service Provider, is to manage that cost pass on to assessors and to the service provider itself. So while I can't say exactly how much these things will cost, and that would ultimately be up to, in some extent, the service provider, we are very mindful of managing that cost, particularly while demand is still ramping up.
Thanks, Isaac. Jo B, this question for you. Was a rollout of scorecard assessments considered as opposed to the NatHERS for Existing Homes rollout? What additional information collected via the NatHERS process was considered worth the change of tool and process? And that's from Sonia. Over to you, Jo.
It's a great question. So thanks, Sonia, for your question. What I would say is that all Australian governments have been working together to determine, the parameters that would be required for any nationally harmonised approach to disclosure of information, and a number of the factors within those processes identified, the features of NatHERS in terms of its national governance and, long history of operation backed by best available science was worth leveraging. And that was originally a decision made in by all energy ministers in the trajectory for low energy buildings, which is available publicly. So you can read more about that. So I wouldn't say it's, scorecard versus NatHERS here. What we've been doing as all Australian governments is working together to learn from the experience of the scorecard, the residential efficiency scorecard, to look at all of the NatHERS processes that are also in functioning at the moment for new builds, and to look at the disclosure parameters and the design of the disclosure framework and work out what the best way forward was in terms of a national approach to all of these elements. Consistency and comparability of ratings for new and existing homes was a really key element, particularly for industry, and we've heard very strongly from industry. There's been a number of different reports published. Every Building Counts is sort of one of those that talks about how important it is to have that consistency and comparability of ratings for all Australian homes. So ensuring that consumers could compare on an even playing field was really important for disclosure as well.
Thanks, Jo. Okay. Shay Singh is asking a question that I'll give to you, Isaac. Will the independent auditors be picked from the current pool of assessors? And if so, will there be an additional code of conduct developed for the auditors? Great idea, Shay. Over to you, Isaac.
Thanks, Jo. It's a good question. So the exact details of what the requirements will be for independent auditors and who will be eligible will be released closer to the launch of NatHERS for Existing Homes, but certainly there will be requirements set for those auditors. They will need to agree to that as part of their participation. And it's very reasonable to assume that that would include things like conflict of interest and all of those sorts of important things that you want to make sure that the auditors can be trusted and can deliver reliable reviews of assessments. Whether specifically they will come from the current pool is something that we're still working through. It's something that we'll come back to you on further. But we're mindful of making sure that we have auditors who do have sufficient experience and knowledge in the space to be able to accurately look at someone else's assessment and review it. And that might mean somebody who was from the current pool of assessors.
Thanks, Isaac. Roger has asked a question. After an existing home assessment has been completed, how will the homeowner update the property's record if any recommendations and energy improvements have been undertaken? That is, this is a good question, will they need to request a follow-up inspection? Jo B, can you answer that for Roger, please?
That's a great question. So thanks everyone for all your great questions coming through today. Much appreciated. Well, it really depends on the purpose of that assessment and rating. So, for example, under, possibly through a finance product, there might be a need to undertake a follow-up sort of assessment and rating if that was a condition of the financing, for example. We've been talking to the finance sector and they're quite interested in supporting Australians to accelerate upgrades and so understanding what the contribution is that's being made, resulting from those upgrades would be important. There wouldn't be any requirement, however, through NatHERS for anyone to undertake an additional inspection or a follow-up inspection. So those triggers would sit within any of the individual initiatives or programs. What I would say is that NatHERS provides the capability for that to happen and the capability for that to be measured. So that could be whether that be the measurement in greenhouse gas emissions, an abatement, or whether it be about the energy use. But yeah, it will be dependent on say under disclosure, that trigger would then fall at point of sale or lease, depending on what the parameters were that were set for disclosure. Obviously there would be an advantage if you've improved the property to having a follow-up inspection made and re-rating done at that point.
Thank you, Jo. Sabrina is asking about using whether there'll be a requirement to use, or whether you can use a different AAO for your existing home certificate and accreditation to the AAO who you used for your new build certificates and accreditation. So Isaac, can you pick up that question, please?
Thanks, Joe and Sabrina. So the Assessor Accreditation Service Provider for Existing Homes, as I've mentioned, is proposed to be procured. We haven't gone through that procurement process yet, and that means that I can't comment on who that service provider would be. It could be one or all of the current AEOs that tender for it, or it might not. So there may be overlap or there might not. You will be able to use a different service provider if that is what you choose to use. Or in the case that your current AAO becomes a existing homes assessor accreditation service provider, you should be able to use the same one as well.
Thanks, Isaac. Bijan, I'm going to flip down to your question. Sorry to muck around my moderators. I just know that Bijan's question's been there for a little while. For items concealed between the walls, that is, things that you can't see, what is the process for the correct assumption of those? For example, insulation and reflective foil that's invisible. And I think I'll give that to you, Joe.
Thanks, Bijan, for your question. That's a great question. So one of the things I probably should have mentioned earlier, and one of the other questions actually, is about the approach to default assumptions that's been proposed under the existing home scheme. And that's really important because unlike a new homes assessment where you have detailed plans and specifications available for that design and for that building, in most cases you wouldn't have that information available for an existing home. So that does lead to the need to attend site to collect the relevant data. Obviously, in the case of insulation, we want to make sure that the approach being taken for the assessment is safe, and efficient and all of those things. So what we've identified is areas like insulation in the walls or the floor, underfloor, or other areas that you can't see or are difficult to access within an assessment setting. There would be default assumptions that relate to different, elements of the building. So for example, for insulation, what was the minimum requirements for a building of that age, for example. So if you want to know more about any of those technical settings, get along to our Thursday session and hear all about energy rating tools and technical work.
Thanks, Joe. Just a warning that we're running out of time, and a reminder too that we will be getting back to those questions that we haven't had time for today via a variety of different channels. But for now, from Anonymous, around whole of home, which is not used in New South Wales, does that mean that whole of home accreditation will have to be achieved prior to applying for existing home accreditation for those New South Wales assessors? Isaac, would you like to answer that one, please?
Thanks, Joe. So whole of home is an important part of the NatHERS for Existing Homes assessment process and is going to be applied in all NatHERS for Existing Homes assessments. The accreditation for new homes, including whole of home versus thermal, is separate from the NatHERS for Existing Homes accreditation. So you won't need to have your new homes whole of home accreditation if you don't have it, but you still need to be able to competently perform the whole of home elements of the NatHERS for Existing Homes assessment if you are to become an existing homes assessor.
Thanks, Isaac. Marcelo, is there a strategy for completing assessments offline? For example, in regions where phone service or internet is not available. Toby, for you.
Yep, so as part of the field trials, we'll be doing assessments in a very broad range of locations. So we'll be able to test approaches like that in how you would deal with that scenario. Can you perform an assessment or do the data collection when there isn't phone or internet service?
Thanks, Toby. I think we'll call it one final question with Sonia, and then we'll begin the close down of our webinar. So are there plans for supporting upgrades, for example, insulation to be offered, for example, STC certificates or other? Some states offer this, but not all, including New South Wales. Joe B, for you.
Thanks. That's another great question. Thanks for your question, Sonia. In terms of the approach to, I suppose, accelerating upgrade action, we are looking at just the current initiatives that are available across the states and territories at the moment. And as I mentioned previously, we do a lot of work with the finance sector, who are currently looking at, different consumer offerings as well, and how they might be able to leverage rating schemes like NatHERS in the design of those products. So in terms of under NatHERS, we wouldn't be offering like SCT certificates or anything else at this stage. We're enabling the measurement and assessment of Australian homes, but in terms of those offerings, that would be up to the other residential building policies and drivers.
Okay, thank you, Joe. Now that was a huge amount of information for you, and I hope it has answered a lot of your questions. I appreciate that there are still many more sitting in our Slido back of house, and we will get to those. I thank you very much for your interest today, and I really hope that you're able to extend that interest by going over to DQ's Consultation Hub, where we have our consultation paper. Please review that in more detail, and please translate that into providing us a submission so that we can hear from you. We do have one further webinar, as I flagged with you earlier, and that's happening this Thursday on the 15th of August at 12:30 p.m. It's going to focus on software tools and accreditation. I know that there were some questions last webinar and this webinar about that. That is where you're going to find most of the answers to those questions if you haven't heard them already. Now, if you haven't registered for that session, please do so. The details are on the NatHERS website. And note that all 3 webinars have been or will be recorded and published on the website after they've been conducted. Now, if you have any follow-up questions or queries, please contact our teams at admin@nathers.gov.au. Once again, I extend my gratitude to you all for coming here today, for asking your questions and for listening to what we are proposing. Please visit our consultation site and thank you and have a great day.